So the history of this is a very interesting history, Old Bexley and Sidcup constituency, because, and I think this is the reason why there is no mainstream media attention, because the mainstream media is just simply a tool of the state now, just like how the USSR were. They just had their media, their mainstream media, shills who just controlled them, told them to say this, told them to say that. Mainstream media are no different. I know this, having been in central pubs near Whitehall and places like that. All the journalists and MPs all hang out together and have a laugh and get pissed and everything. They're all friends, right? And they all go part of this establishment, right? So the mainstream media aren't here because I believe, and no one is talking about it that much, is because this was the constituency of a very notorious Prime Minister in the past, from 1970 to 1974, I believe, called Ted Heath. Now, if people don't know who Ted Heath is, I strongly advise you go and look up who he is. And to this day, there is much controversy around this former Prime Minister. Whilst he was the MP of this constituency, he was also the Prime Minister. And the reason why there's controversy around him is because there is many accusations and many investigations by multiple police services, including the Met, Kent, Sussex, trying to think, Guernsey, and I'll tell you why Guernsey in particular, because he's been accused of being a paedophile.
Heath, a politician, a Prime Minister, and some suggest a paedophile. For 2 years, police have investigated claims of child sexual abuse allegedly committed during the life of the former Premier, an inquiry that has been hugely detailed and hugely controversial. Today, as their national inquiry came to a close, Wiltshire Police revealed Sir Edward would have been interviewed under caution over a number of accusations, had he now been alive.
I am satisfied there are compelling and obvious reasons to investigate allegations made against Sir Edward Heath. As I have said, Sir Edward Heath was an extremely prominent, influential and high-profile person who was arguably one of the most powerful people in the world, commensurate with the public office and political office he held. The allegations against him were of the utmost seriousness and from a significant number of people. I hope people will understand that given these circumstances, it would be an indefensible dereliction of a Chief Constable's duty not to have investigated the allegations against a former Prime Minister, even though he is deceased.
He has abused children, it is believed. And people even say now that there is so much evidence against this guy that if he was alive today, I think he died in 2003 or something, 2005, that there is so much evidence against this guy that had he been alive today, he would have to be arrested. He is basically the Jimmy Saville of the Conservative Party. That's what he's regarded as.
When you had that long chat with Jonathan Wedger, who's obviously a former Scotland Yard detective, who approached his bosses to try and uncover this sort of what we believe to be an establishment cover-up of child abuse. You talked about Edward Heath, the late Edward Heath, who was Prime Minister from 1970 to 74. You were a witness, I believe.
Yes, I was a witness for Conifer, inquiry.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I believe you weren't a victim, is that right? But you were a witness.
Well, yes, but what it was that when I left care after 12 to 13 years in care, there was no aftercare given, and I had nowhere to go, and I lived on the streets of London, 62, 63, and we formed a group of runaways. I met at Euston Station, and we used to stick together. And then there was me and John Hilton. We were walking through Grosvenor Square on our way to the Piccadilly arcades, and this car pulled up in Grosvenor Square and asked us if we wanted a lift. So we looked at him and we said, no thank you. And then we used to frequent the Hampstead Heath car parks in Spaniards Inn. And we went up there to try and survive, you know, to try and to do what we had to do to survive, you know, which wasn't nice. I don't mind admitting it. You know, we had to sell our bodies to survive, because if we didn't, we would have died. We would have died, because in 62, 63, it was bitter winters, and many a times I just wanted to lay down and die, just lay down and die. So anyway, when we went up there at the night time, this car pulled in, and this man got out, and boys who I was with said, this is Uncle Eddie. So I looked at him and I thought, I know that face, I know that, I've seen him before. And it was the same man who tried to pick us up in Grosvenor Square, which turned out to be Edward Heath. He went with Edward Heath, and it was obvious what he had to do, you know. But we all knew. We never really talked about what we had to do to survive, you know, but we knew what was going on, what we had to do, if that makes sense.
Of course.
You
And
know?
did you have any other experiences of Edward Heath, or is that the one that you remember?
Yeah, that's the one I remember. But he was a regular in the car park. He was a regular. And as I said, they called him Uncle Eddie. They knew him. Them boys were on the streets, them runaways, way before me, so they knew everything what was going on, you know. And it was just, I was just lucky that they befriended me, because I wouldn't have survived the streets otherwise. I wouldn't be here now talking.
And how old were you? How old were you at the time?
16.
Yeah, the young lad.
And some of them runaway boys were 12, 11, 14, 13.
And also there's a bit of a connection with him and Saville.
But do I think Edward Heath was a paedophile? Yes. I've spoken to Michael Tarriger and somebody called James Reeves, Mike Veal, Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police, who led the investigation into looking into whether Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister, was a paedophile. I know about him, and I know what's happened to him since he tried to lead that investigation and lead the truth. Was Edward Heath a paedophile? You asked me what I can say, and say with conviction. I believe with conviction our former Prime Minister, Edward Heath, was a paedophile. One other thing I can say with conviction, I believe BBC Panorama have produced programmes that have displayed very dodgy journalistic ethics, and they've had an agenda, and they have presented lies. And I'm happy as a journalist to come forward and say that. They could sue me if they like. I've got enough evidence to support those statements.
And the reason why I say Guernsey police were looking into him as well is because a lot of these supposed acts that he possibly conducted against children was done on Guernsey. Now, Guernsey has got another interesting history as well, where it's not only a tax haven, but it also seems to be a haven for a lot of paedophilia behaviour.
Deputy Headmaster said, did I want to go sailing? Yes. I was the only boy there. Nothing else to do. It was either that or do fucking chores, gardening, which I didn't want to do. So we went to a place called Pin Mill, which was then a little yachty haven, nothing. There were no gin palace, they were sailing boats. Probably up to 30, 35 foot at the most. And we went sailing. There was 4 of us. Me, Ted Heath, I didn't know who he was, the doctor from the school, and the fucking deputy headmaster. And I was told to go nude swimming, which I did. Ted Heath dried me. Give me a blood, played me with Willie, had me do kissing. Well, he was kissing more than blowing, to be quite honest with you, and got me to do the same to him. And that was the extent of it. I got £5,000 and a fag. That was the extent of it.
Still,
And it didn't happen in the open. We went in the cabin on this thing. There was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said no, although you'd think at 13, 14 years old, you know.
Yeah.
But if you haven't got anybody, right, to back your corner, who the hell do you tell? For me, we were pieces of meat, hence the name The Meat Run.
So, this is also the reason why the police were looking into him, and I think this is the reason why this election is so silent, because the freedom movement, people in the freedom movement, they're very viciously, vocally anti-paedophilia. But this is the man I'm supporting, David Curtin of the Heritage Party, and I'd rather take him than Richard Tice any day.
This is something that needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with brutal honesty. It's good that Sajid Javid has commissioned this report, but honestly, this is something that should have happened 20 years ago, because it's been going on for at least 20 years. People have known about it in various arms of the state. It's been covered up, but more importantly, people have been afraid to talk about it because of the culture of political correctness and the adherence to multiculturalism, which in this particular case clearly has not worked. There have been studies done before, and there's been a whole book written on it, which is called Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin. But my concern is justice. My concern is making sure that no more girls are raped. That should be at the forefront of everyone's minds and everyone's aims. And if that means we have to be politically incorrect, then so be it. And it's about time that we were. But the vast majority of the country hates what is going on and hates the culture of silence, which is driven by political correctness. This country is drenched in political correctness from top to bottom. It creates a culture of fear which allows these horrible crimes to go on. It's time for simple honesty, and it's time for justice. 50% at least of the girls who are victims come from just the 1% of the population who are in care. A lot of them are girls that come from broken families, dysfunctional families. They're being looked after by the state. They don't have a loving mother and father. So they get into problems, they're vulnerable, they are exposed, and no one is looking out for them.
These have obviously been found in many, many other cities and towns around the country, but there hasn't been much of many prosecutions happened in London. But, obviously, as the police commissioner for Northumberland said, this is happening anywhere, and the only reason why it's not being found is that people aren't looking. Are you looking in London for grooming gangs in London in order to prosecute people? Because if it's going on in cities like Oxford and Bristol and Peterborough and Aylesbury, smaller places, it's surely going on in London as well on a large scale.
Can I just be clear, Chair? Is the inference that because of my faith or my ethnic origin, I'm not seeking to follow these crimes?
No, I'm asking you because you're the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Assembly Member Curtin, I think you're pretty much drifting now onto drifting off the subject itself. So can I just ask you to stick to the topic and ask a relevant question, please?
Well, Chair, I mean, I was originally asking about Black Lives Matter, and then the Mayor started talking about slavery, and the questioning has developed.
Yeah, but you're still going off the tangent now, so can you please be cautious about that and not ask...
Okay, well, Chair, if you want to disallow my question, that's your prerogative.
Well, I will use that then. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on.
So I just want you all to just keep in mind that when most of you go to the ballot box tomorrow, most of you don't even know who the candidate is really, the Conservative candidate, and most only vote for the party, no longer the individual. So I want you to keep in mind before you cast that Conservative vote what is this party actually about? To this day, the Conservative Party have never apologised. They have never, ever, they don't even bother speaking about Ted Heath anymore. And they don't really care about any of the victims that allegedly occurred. So be careful what you're voting for, guys, because you're not voting for the candidate. Because let's be honest, the candidate is only hiding behind the party label. The individual candidate I've heard is pretty weak. But because he's an empty suit, he's just going to be representing the Conservative Party. And because he's weak, he's be voting for more authoritarian laws. So just remember that before you cast your vote for a party which hides someone like Ted Heath in their ranks. And to this day, have never apologised to anyone because of that.